Some people mistake loyalty for weakness. Vivian Nolan was about to discover exactly how costly that mistake could be. Hey, Unbroken Truths family, welcome back. I'm so glad you're here today. Tell me where you're watching from. And if you're new here and this is your first time on the channel, do yourself a favor and hit that subscribe button right now, because we don't do surface level stories here. We go deep, we go real, and we always find the truth. Now, let's talk about Daniel Mercer. The form hit Vivian Nolan's desk at 4:47 on a Tuesday. One page, clean margins, neat, precise handwriting, the kind that belonged to a man who measured twice and cut once. A formal leave request for a single day, one day. Attached to it, a printed program for a children's school play called The Whispering Woods, performance time circled in blue pen. Vivian didn't even sit down to read it. She stood over her glass and chrome desk in her 43rd floor office, the city sprawling 50 stories below like a circuit board she personally owned, and she scanned the request the way a surgeon scans an X-ray, quickly, clinically, looking for exactly what she expected to find. Absence request. Jensen. Wait, Mercer. Daniel Mercer. Accounting. Her finger moved down the page. Reason. Daughter's school performance. The Whispering Woods, 23rd. Her lips thinned. She set the form down, pressed the intercom with one finger, and spoke in the same tone she used to redirect quarterly projections. Denied. Send him the standard policy reminder. That was it. 14 seconds. No hesitation, no second thought, no curiosity about the man on the other side of that request. Just a reflex, clean, efficient, and, as it turned out, catastrophically wrong. Because here's what Vivian Nolan didn't know at that moment. She didn't know that Daniel Mercer had been at Vance Nolan Capital for 9 years without a single unexcused absence. Not one. She didn't know that he had pulled triple shifts during the fiscal year-end crunch of 2019, that he had personally caught a $2.3 million accounting error that saved the company from an SEC audit, and that he had done all of it quietly, without asking for recognition, without leveraging it for a raise, without once using it as a bargaining chip. She didn't know that he did all of this while raising a 7-year-old daughter named Lily entirely on his own. She didn't know that Lily had rehearsed her part, a singing tree in the Whispering Woods, every single evening for 6 weeks, that she practiced her lines at the breakfast table, that she had made her father a crayon drawing of the two of them, standing side by side beneath a lopsided yellow sun, and written at the bottom in barely legible cursive, "Me and Daddy. Forever." Vivian Nolan knew none of this, and so in 14 seconds she made a decision she would spend a very long time trying to undo. The termination letter hit Daniel's inbox at 8:02 a.m. on the morning of the 23rd. He read it sitting in the third row of the Eastfield Elementary auditorium, Lily's small hand wrapped around two of his fingers, her feet swinging off the edge of the seat, too short to touch the floor. Gross insubordination, neglect of duties, effective immediately. He read it once, turned his phone face down on his knee, and when the lights dimmed and a small girl in a green costume walked on stage and began to sing, his daughter, his Lily, her voice small and slightly off-key and absolutely perfect, Daniel Mercer did not cry. He just watched. And somewhere between the first verse and the curtain call, he made a decision of his own. But that's not the part that changes everything. The part that changes everything happens 3 weeks later, in a ballroom on the other side of the city, under chandelier light, in a room full of the most powerful people in the country. And Vivian Nolan will walk in expecting to find her father. What she finds instead will shatter every assumption she's ever made about power, people, and the true cost of a 14-second decision. Drop a comment below. Have you ever had a boss like Vivian? Or have you been a Daniel? I want to hear your story. And if you haven't subscribed yet, you're going to want to be here for what comes next. Because this story, it gets so much better. Daniel Mercer was not a complicated man. He woke at 5:30 every morning, braided Lily's hair before school, packed her lunch with a sticky note tucked inside, a small drawing, a joke, sometimes just the words "I'm proud of you," and was at his desk by 7:45 without fail. His colleagues liked him, not in the loud, backslapping way of office politics, but in the quiet way people like someone who never throws them under the bus, who always delivers, who remembers your birthday and covers your shift without making you feel like you owe him. 9 years at Vance Nolan Capital. 9 years of spreadsheets, forecasts, late nights, and early mornings. 9 years of building something stable and solid, not for glory, but because Lily needed a foundation. Because after her mother Sarah passed from a sudden illness when Lily was just 2, Daniel had made himself a promise. She will never feel unsafe. Not once. Not ever. That promise was the engine running everything. His attendance record was flawless, his work impeccable. His desk had exactly 2 personal items, a photo of Lily laughing on a swing and that crayon drawing laminated and tucked beneath his monitor like a compass. He had never asked Vance Nolan Capital for a single thing in 9 years, until the 23rd. The leave request form took Daniel 4 drafts to write. He included everything: the performance date, the time, a detailed breakdown of how he had front-loaded his entire week's workload to ensure zero disruption. He even attached a note confirming his colleague had agreed to cover any urgent queries. It was, by any reasonable measure, airtight. He placed it on the executive assistant's desk with both hands, like something fragile. The response came the same afternoon. "Miss Nolan has reviewed your request, Mr. Mercer. It has been denied." Her exact words, "unacceptable. Any absence on the 23rd will be treated as unexcused and subject to disciplinary action." The assistant slid the crumpled form back across the desk without making eye contact. Daniel stood there for a moment. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Someone laughed somewhere down the hall. He picked up the form, folded it once, put it in his jacket pocket, and that evening, when Lily ran into the kitchen asking, "Daddy, are you coming?" her eyes enormous, her gap-toothed grin splitting her whole face, Daniel Mercer looked at his daughter and said, without hesitation, "I'll be there. I wouldn't miss it for the world." The termination letter arrived before the curtain even rose. He read it, turned his phone over, and watched his daughter sing. The days after the termination were quieter than Daniel expected. No dramatic outburst, no desperate emails. He simply cleared his desk, said goodbye to the colleagues who mattered, and walked out of Vance Nolan Capital for the last time carrying a small cardboard box and Lily's laminated drawing. What people didn't know, what Vivian certainly didn't know, was that 3 weeks before the termination, Daniel had received a call. Richard Stark, Vivian's father, founder of the original Stark Family Trust, a man with more capital under management than most countries had in reserves, and as it turned out, a man who had been quietly watching Daniel's work for months. They had met by accident at a charity auction the previous spring, Daniel there as a volunteer, Richard there as a donor. They had ended up at the same table, and Richard, who had a sharp eye for character the way jewelers have a sharp eye for flaws, had spent 2 hours talking to him. Not about accounting, about Lily, about what it meant to show up. "You're the kind of man I've spent 30 years trying to hire," Richard had said, finishing his wine. "Call me." Daniel hadn't at first. He wasn't a man who collected favors or climbed on the backs of connections. But after the termination letter, after Lily asked, "Daddy, does this mean we have to move again?" he made the call. Richard picked up on the second ring. "I wondered when you'd reach out," he said, and Daniel could hear the smile in his voice. "I have a proposition." Meanwhile, 43 floors above the city, Vivian Nolan had already forgotten his name. The Grand Hyatt Ballroom was everything Vivian had built her life to belong to. Crystal chandeliers, emerald gown, the measured warmth of a woman who had learned to perform approachability without ever actually practicing it. She moved through the room like a current, decisive, controlled, magnetic. She was scanning for her father when she saw him, a familiar set of shoulders, dark hair catching the candlelight, and a laugh, low and easy, that she recognized from 9 years of passing him in corridors without ever really seeing him. Daniel Mercer, sitting at her father's private table, not nervously, not performing, just there, relaxed, animated, leaning forward the way people do when they're genuinely engaged in a conversation they're enjoying. And Richard Stark, her father, the man whose approval Vivian had spent her entire career engineering, had his hand resting on Daniel's arm like they were old friends. The champagne flute was still in Vivian's hand. She crossed the room. "Daniel," she said, her voice landing like a blade on marble. He turned, and to his credit, he didn't flinch. just looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite name, somewhere between calm and careful. "I think you owe me an explanation," she said. Richard looked up. And what happened next? The measured way he set down his glass, the slight tilt of his head, the quiet weight in his voice when he finally spoke, would stay with Vivian for a very long time. "Actually, Eleanor, Vivian, I think that might be the other way around." Richard didn't raise his voice. He never had to. He told Vivian everything. Daniel's advisory role, the Stark Legacy philanthropic project, the flexible arrangement built around Lily's schedule, the results that had already exceeded projections by 30%. And then, quietly, he said the thing that cut deepest. "While you were enforcing policy, this man was quietly changing lives. I offered him what your company couldn't, the simple dignity of being seen." The ballroom felt airless. Vivian stood there in her emerald gown, in the room she had worked her entire life to command, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Small, not professionally, not strategically, just small. Like a person who had been so busy building a machine that she forgot machines don't feel anything, don't lose people, don't miss school plays, don't tuck drawings under their monitors. She looked across the room at Daniel, now laughing with a group by the fountain, unburdened in a way she had never once seen him at Vance Nolan. She had fired him for one day in 9 years, and her own father had caught what she threw away. She excused herself from a conversation she was no longer present for, walked to the edge of the room, and stood alone with the city glittering below. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Vivian Nolan had absolutely no idea what her next move should be. She found him at the dessert table. Of all the places for a reckoning, it was beside a tower of petit fours and a vase of white lilies, and something about that detail, the lilies, made her breath catch for just a second. "Daniel," she said. He turned, unhurried, holding a small tart. Vivian had prepared something, a careful, structured apology, organized the way she organized everything, with a beginning, a rationale, and a clear conclusion. But standing in front of him now, all of it evaporated. "I was wrong," she said. Just that. Daniel looked at her for a moment. The noise of the ballroom wrapped around them like a curtain. "I know you believed in what you were doing," he said finally, his voice even. "No performance, no theater. Policy has its place, but people aren't policies, Vivian." She nodded. It was all she could manage. "Lily had a wonderful night," he added, and a quiet warmth moved across his face. "She was the best tree in the whole woods, sang her heart out." Vivian felt something behind her sternum, not guilt exactly, something older, something that had been quietly calcifying for years and was only now beginning to crack. "Your father is a good man," Daniel said. "He sees people." A pause. "You could too. I think it's actually in you. It's just buried under a lot of quarterly reports." It wasn't cruel. It wasn't even an accusation. It was just true, delivered by a man who had every reason to be bitter and had chosen, inexplicably, not to be. Vivian excused herself shortly after walking out into the cool night air. Let a cab take her home through streets blurred by city lights and a silence inside her she didn't know how to name yet. But something had shifted. The machine had developed a heartbeat. The Monday morning after the gala, Vivian Nolan arrived at Vance Nolan Capital 40 minutes early. Her assistant, Sarah, the same Sarah she had kept late to file a report while her son burned with fever, looked up from her desk with the practiced neutrality of someone who had learned not to expect warmth from this direction. She opened her mouth to deliver the morning briefing. Vivian held up a hand, not dismissively, differently. "How is your son?" she asked. Sarah blinked. A small, almost imperceptible recalibration happened behind her eyes. "He's better, thank you. Much better." "Good," Vivian nodded once. "Clear my 9 a.m. and pull Daniel Mercer's full personnel file. 9 years of performance reviews, commendations, everything. I want it on my desk in 20 minutes. Sarah stared. "Miss Nolan? You heard me." What Vivian read over the next 2 hours dismantled something in her, slowly, methodically, the way a building is demolished when it's done carefully. Not an explosion, just one wall at a time. 9 years, not a single unexcused absence before the 23rd. 17 internal commendations, most of them filed by colleagues, not supervisors. The $2.3 million accounting discrepancy he had caught and flagged in 2019, saving the company from regulatory scrutiny, noted in a single line of a quarterly report, unacknowledged, unrewarded. Performance reviews that used words like exceptional, meticulous, indispensable, and at the very back of the file, a small printed note clipped to his original onboarding paperwork. A handwritten line from the hiring manager who had brought him in. Single father, lost his wife 2 years prior, came to the interview with a photo of his daughter in his breast pocket. Hire him. This one will never let you down. Vivian sat back in her chair. The city hummed 43 floors below. The same view she had stood at 1,000 times, feeling like she was surveying something she had built and owned. It looks different now. Smaller somehow. Or maybe she was just finally seeing it at the right scale. She picked up her phone. She didn't call her lawyer. She didn't call her PR team. She called her father. Richard picked up on the third ring. "I need Daniel's number," she said. A pause. Then, warmly, "I was wondering how long that would take." They met at a coffee shop 3 blocks from Eastfield Elementary. Daniel arrived first. Of course he did. He was already seated when Vivian walked in, a black coffee in front of him, Lily's latest drawing visible through the clear pocket of his notebook. A rocket ship this time, with 2 figures in the window, waving. Vivian sat down across from him. No power suit today, just a dark coat, minimal jewelry, the deliberate plainness of a woman who had decided, at least for this morning, to show up as herself rather than her title. She slid a white envelope across the table. Daniel looked at it, didn't touch it. "What is this?" "A formal letter of wrongful termination acknowledgement," she said. "Full back pay for the week's lost, a written apology on company letterhead, and," she exhaled slowly, "a standing offer to return to Vance Nolan Capital. Senior analyst position. Flexible hours built into your contract, not as a favor, as a right." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a school bus rolled past the window. They both watched it without meaning to. "I'm not coming back, Vivian," he said. Not unkindly. The way you tell someone a simple truth that has no malice in it. "I know," she said, and she did. She had known before she put the offer in the envelope. "But I needed you to have it anyway. You earned it. 9 times over." He looked at her then, really looked, the way people rarely look at Vivian Nolan, like she was a person rather than a position. "Why are you really here?" he asked. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "Because my father asked me once, years ago, what kind of leader I wanted to be, and I gave him the answer I had rehearsed." She paused. "I want to give him the real answer now, but I need to figure out what it is first." Daniel studied her. Then, slowly, he reached across the table and picked up the envelope and turned it over once. "You know what Lily said when I told her I'd been let go?" he asked. Vivian shook her head. "She said, 'That's okay, Daddy. We've got each other and that's the whole thing.'" A quiet smile crossed his face. 7 years old already got it figured out. Vivian laughed. It surprised her. The sound of it, unguarded and genuine, foreign in her own throat. "She sounds remarkable," she said. "She is," Daniel said simply. "She gets it from her mother." The coffee shop hummed around them. Somewhere in the back, someone dropped a tray, and everyone looked up and then looked away again. Life, continuing its ordinary business. Before they parted, Daniel offered his hand across the table. "For what it's worth," he said, "I think you have it in you. The real kind of leadership. It just needs room." Vivian shook his hand, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, Vivian Nolan left a meeting without having won anything, and felt, inexplicably, like she had gained something far more valuable. 6 months later, Vance Nolan Capital launched something no one on the 43rd floor had ever proposed before. A flexible family leave policy, generous, unconditional, drafted not by lawyers, but by Vivian herself, late at night at her kitchen table in the apartment she usually only slept in, cross-referencing it against her own personnel files, looking for every Daniel Mercer she might have missed. She found 4. She called each of them personally, not through her assistant, not by email. She called them, introduced herself, and said the same thing she had practiced saying until it stopped feeling like a performance. "I owe you an apology, and I'd like to make it right." 2 of them came back. 2 didn't. She honored all of them. The change didn't make headlines. It wasn't designed to. It was just right. A quiet correction. A gear in the machine was replaced with something that actually had a pulse. Daniel Mercer, meanwhile, had built something he hadn't expected. The advisory role with Richard Stark had grown, quietly, steadily, the way good things tend to grow when they're not being forced. The Stark Legacy Philanthropic Fund was operational, channeling resources into education programs across the city. Daniel ran the financial architecture with the same meticulous care he had given to every spreadsheet of the past 9 years, except now when Lily had a school play, a parent-teacher conference, or just a rough Tuesday that needed her dad at pickup. He was there, every single time. He and Richard had developed a genuine friendship, the kind that crosses generations when two people simply recognize in each other an integrity that doesn't negotiate with itself. Richard told him once, over dinner, that he reminded him of who he had been before the money got too loud. Daniel took that as the highest compliment he had ever received. On a cool Friday evening in late autumn, Lily sat at the kitchen table doing homework while Daniel cooked. The apartment smelled like garlic and something warm. The crayon drawings on the refrigerator had multiplied, a whole gallery now, taped in overlapping layers, evidence of a childhood being lived at full volume. "Dad," Lily said, without looking up from her worksheet, "are you happy?" Daniel turned from the stove, looked at his daughter, her red curls bent over her paper, her small hand moving her pencil in determined loops. "Yeah, sweetheart," he said. "I really am." She nodded, satisfied, like she had simply needed confirmation of something she already knew. "Good," she said. "Me too." And Vivian Nolan? She was still learning. That was the truest thing that could be said about her now. Not that she had arrived somewhere, not that she had been redeemed in some clean, cinematic way, but that she had finally, genuinely, started moving in the right direction. She had begun keeping a single item on her desk. Not a trophy, not a plaque, a sticky note, small, pale yellow, written in her own handwriting. People are not policies. She read it every morning before she read anything else. And slowly, imperfectly, haltingly, one decision at a time, Vivian Nolan began to lead like someone who had finally understood what leadership was actually for. That's the full story, Unbroken Truth's family. And here's what I want you to think about. Has there been a moment in your life where you chose your child, your family, your truth over a job, a title, or someone's approval? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story moved you even a little, share it. Someone out there needs to see this today. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one. Because the truth, it always comes out, and it always wins.